A dirt field. The blistering heat of a Mesopotamian afternoon. A heavy, jagged stone lying in the dust. From her oldest boy. Same bloodline. Same God. Same tearing apart at the seams. Most people read the book of Genesis. Isaac runs his trembling hands over the rough animal hair. He pulls the boy in to kiss him. He inhales the scent of earth and sweat lingering in the borrowed coat. And he speaks the words of power. The blessing is not a religious formality. It is the transfer of an empire. It is the legal and spiritual weight of the covenant, passed down from Abraham, spoken into the air. Irrevocable, the moment it leaves the patriarch's lips. Jacob takes it. He swallows it whole. And he slips out of the tent just before the true heir arrives. Esau walks in. The air in the tent shifts. The realization hits the old man first. The Hebrew text says Isaac trembles with a violent, massive shaking. It is the physical, visceral shock of a man who realizes his own household has just robbed him in his bed. Then comes the cry of the older brother, a great and exceedingly bitter cry. A hunter weeping in the dirt, a father paralyzed by his own mistake, a mother hiding in the shadows of the camp, a family tearing itself apart over a zero-sum game of grace. Esau begs for a leftover blessing. Have you but one blessing? My father? But there is nothing left. The well is dry, and assume they are looking at a gallery of saints. They see the patriarchs and matriarchs. They imagine stained glass figures. The favoritism that began as a quiet preference has metastasized into a permanent rupture. Rebekah got exactly what she wanted. Jacob got the blessing. But the cost is the total destruction of the household. Esau makes a vow in his heart, counting the days until his father breathes his last, so he can draw a blade across his brother's throat. Jacob has to run. He flees with nothing but a staff in his hand, leaving behind the wealth he just inherited, walking into the empty desert toward his mother's homeland. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has outsmarted the system, but the deceiver is walking directly into a trap, and the battlefield is about to shift from a dying father's tent to a bridal chamber. We often read the story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel as a tragic ancient romance. We see a man working 14 years under the Mesopotamian sun for the love of his life. We imagine the heavy bridal veil hiding a face in the dark tent. We picture the harsh morning light exposing the wrong sister in the marriage bed. But if you look at the literary structure of these chapters, you see something much darker. You are watching a generational curse replicate itself with terrifying precision, in flowing robes, holding the foundation of faith, modeling exactly what a holy, chosen household is supposed to look like. Deception breeds deception. Jacob bought a birthright with a bowl of red soup. He stole a covenant blessing using slaughtered goatskins. He exploited his father's blindness in the dark. Now, a father exploits him in the dark. The trickster is tricked. The system he used to gain power is now being used to break him. And the collateral damage falls entirely on two women. The marriage bed becomes a battlefield. Rachel has the beauty. Leah has the fertility. Rachel has the husband's heart. Leah has the sons. It is a vicious, decade-long Cold War. Leah gives birth to Reuben. She gives birth to Simeon. She gives birth to Levi. She gives birth to Judah. Every time a son arrives, she names him like a distress signal. The Lord has seen my affliction. Now my husband will be attached to me. Every birth is a desperate plea for the Ahav that Jacob refuses to give her. Rachel watches from the other tent. The silence of her own womb is deafening. She walks into Jacob's tent and screams, "Give me children, or I shall die." The desperation escalates. Rachel does exactly what Sarah did 2 generations earlier. She throws her servant, Bilhah, into Jacob's bed to manufacture a victory. Leah retaliates. She hands her own servant, Zilpah, to her husband. The camp is filled with the cries of childbirth. But if you look closer, the text absolutely refuses to cooperate with that image. The book of Genesis is not a theological highlight reel, the tense smell of bitter mandrake roots and exhaustion. 4 women, 1 man, a dozen sons. The entire environment is saturated in silence. Heavy resentment between two sisters who share a life but cannot share peace. These children are not born as gifts of grace. They are drafted as soldiers in a domestic war. The 12 tribes of Israel do not begin in a sanctuary of holy purpose. They are forged in the fires of a toxic rivalry. This is not a story about the triumph of faith. It is the anatomy of a deeply insecure home. And the trauma does not stay contained in the mother's tents. Because when you weaponize children to fight your battles, the children learn how to wage war. Jacob learned favoritism from Isaac. He watched it destroy his relationship with Esau. But instead of breaking the cycle, he brings that exact same poison into the next generation. He just changes the delivery method. And he is about to wrap that poison around the shoulders of his 17th son. The coat is not a garment to keep the boy warm. It is a provocation. When Jacob gives Joseph the Ketonet Passim, the legendary coat of many colors, he is making a devastatingly clear statement to the rest of the camp. In the ancient Near East, a tunic with long sleeves and heavy ornamentation, it is a meticulous, unvarnished record of a deeply broken family. The question is why? Why would the author go out of their way? Is the uniform of an overseer. It is the clothing of someone who does not have to work with his hands. Picture the daily reality of this family. 10 older brothers are out in the blistering heat, sweating in the dust, wrestling with livestock, and bleeding from thorn bushes. And their 17-year-old half-brother walks out to check on them, wearing a piece of fabric that screams, "I am the heir. You are the hired help." The favoritism is no longer a quiet preference, whispered in a tent. It is a visible, daily humiliation. So the brothers watch him walking toward them across the wide, open fields of Dothan. They see the colors of the coat flashing in the sun from a distance. They do not just snap in a moment of sudden anger. They hold a council of war. When Joseph arrives, the violence is immediate. Rough, calloused hands grab the boy, tearing the expensive, brilliantly dyed fabric right off his back. They strip the favorite son naked in the dirt, and they drag him to a pit. The Hebrew word is bor, a dry cistern. It is a hole carved deep into the limestone, dark, echoing, and entirely empty of water. You can hear his voice bouncing off the cold stone walls, begging his own flesh and blood to pull him up. And then the text delivers one of the most chilling sentences in the entire book. Then they sat down to eat a meal. They chew their bread and pass the wine while their brother screams in the dark beneath their feet, to expose the deceit, the favoritism, and the brutal betrayals of the exact people God handpicked to bless the entire world. The numbness is total. The empathy has been completely burned out of them by decades of watching their father love one woman more than another, and one son more than the rest. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders appears on the horizon. You can smell the heavy spices drifting off the camels. Gum, balm, and myrrh heading down to Egypt. Judah looks at the caravan, and he looks at the boy in the pit. He negotiates a price, 20 shekels of silver, the exact ancient market value of a disabled slave. They sell their brother, slaughter a goat, and dip the beautiful coat in the blood. When Jacob sees the ruined fabric, he collapses in grief, completely unaware of the terrifying irony. He deceived his own father using the skin of a slaughtered goat in the dark. Now, his sons are deceiving him using the blood of a slaughtered goat in the daylight. The betrayal was not a random tragedy. It was an inherited skill. And this is exactly where the book of Genesis forces us to look in the mirror. We think of family traits as physical things, a certain curve of the jaw, a specific shade of brown eyes, the cadence of a laugh echoing down a hallway. But the book of Genesis reveals a much darker reality about what gets passed down. Sin is not just a personal failure. It is an heirloom. If you look closely at your own family tree, the answer changes how you read every conflict in your own house. Because we all carry a quiet, heavy assumption. You will find the exact same ghosts that haunted the patriarchs. You sit at a holiday dinner table, the clinking of silverware against porcelain ringing out in a dead, heavy silence. and you feel the invisible tripwires running underneath the floorboards. You know exactly which topics will ignite a war. You know the history of the silent treatments. You feel the heavy, suffocating weight of a father's withheld approval, or the sharp, metallic sting of a mother's quiet, weaponized disappointment. We like to believe that we are independent of our lineage. We think we can pack our boxes, drive 1,000 miles away, and outrun the dysfunction we grew up breathing. But trauma is not a geography problem. It is a bloodline inheritance. We swear we will never yell like our parents did. We swear we will never play favorites with our children. But then the pressure hits. The stress fractures the surface. Your patience runs dry. When your chest tightens. And suddenly, the exact same tone of voice spills out of your mouth. The exact same instinct to manipulate the truth. Or hide in the dark. Or freeze out the person you love. Takes over the room. Look at the biblical pattern. Abraham lies about his wife to a foreign king to save his own life. A generation later, Isaac walks into the exact same Philistine territory. Looks at the exact same king. We assume that if God is truly present in our lives, the friction will disappear. We think that if grace is real and tells the exact same lie about Rebekah, Jacob learns deception from his mother's whispered schemes in a tent, and a generation later, his sons use the blood of a goat to deceive him in the open daylight. The poison travels down the root system. If you are in a season where you feel trapped by the toxic patterns of your own household, the book of Genesis is not asking you to try harder. It is holding up a mirror to the agonizing reality of human nature. The Bible does not hide the ugly, incurable dysfunction of its heroes. It puts the brokenness on full display because it wants you to know that the divine presence does not require a pristine environment. God does not wait for the household to heal before he steps into the room. He works in the tents where the marriages are freezing cold. He works in the fields where the siblings refuse to speak. He works in the pits where the betrayals are deepest. But the cycle does not have to be permanent, because decades pass. The famine hits the land of Canaan. The soil turns to dust. The crops wither. And the brothers who sold the favorite son are forced to walk down into Egypt to beg for grain. They walk into a massive Egyptian palace. They bow their faces to the polished. The siblings stop fighting. The marriages stop fracturing. The agonizing tension at the holiday dinner table dissolves into perfect peace. Stone floor. And the man holding the power of life and death over them is the very boy they threw into the dark. Jacob breathes his last. The old patriarch is carried back to Canaan and buried in the dust. And the moment the heavy stone is rolled across the tomb, the panic sets in. The brothers look at each other. The umbrella of their father's protection is gone. The math is brutal and simple. The boy they stripped naked is now the second most powerful man on the planet. They threw him in a dry hole. Now, the vizier of Egypt is going to throw them in a grave. The trauma response kicks in immediately. They do what this family has always done. They scheme. They lie. They send a messenger to the towering stone columns of the palace with a fabricated quote from a dead man. Before he died, our father said, "Please forgive your brothers." Even now, even here, the deception replicates. Then the brothers themselves walk into the echoing throne room. They collapse on the polished marble floor. They offer themselves as slaves. The cycle is winding up for one final, devastating strike. Blood for blood, pit for pit. Joseph looks at the hardened men trembling in the dirt. He hears the familiar, desperate manipulation in their voices. We have been taught that a healthy family is the prerequisite for divine purpose. Genesis diagnoses a reality most of us are too ashamed to admit. And the Egyptian ruler begins to weep so loudly, the entire palace can hear the sound bouncing off the walls. He weeps because they still do not understand. After 17 years of surviving the famine under his protection, they still think they are playing the same zero-sum game of the ancient tents. They still believe love is a scarce resource. That must be bought, stolen, or negotiated. Joseph speaks. Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. This is the moment the wheel stops turning. The cycle of violence does not die of natural causes. It has to be absorbed. It has to be swallowed whole by someone holding the power to retaliate. But who chooses to bleed instead of biting back? Joseph refuses the role of the executioner. He promises to feed them. He promises to protect their little ones. The Hebrew text says he comforted them and spoke kindly to their hearts. This is not a temporary political truce. It is a generational exorcism. For 4 generations, this bloodline has operated on manipulation, theft, and weaponized favoritism. A husband abandoned a wife to a pharaoh. A mother manipulated a blind father. An uncle swapped a bride in the dark. Blood soaking into dry, cracked earth. 2 brothers walk out into the open space. The older one's chest is heaving. The dysfunction is not a barrier to the story. It is the raw material. To see how intentionally this is woven into the text, a brother sold a brother for silver. The poison has traveled down the root system for over a century. But here, in a foreign empire, the curse finally hits a wall. The victim holds the sword, and he drops it on the floor. The chosen family is fractured, deeply scarred, and carrying the heavy baggage of unimaginable trauma. But they survive. They are finally, miraculously, held together by a grace that none of them earned. And the way this ancient family record closes points to a reality that changes everything about how we understand the name of God. A brother crushes a skull in a dirt field, and the blood cries out for justice. A pregnant slave runs into a burning desert, and the God of the universe meets her at a spring. A mother manipulates a blind father in the dark, and a stolen blessing shatters a home. 2 sisters turn a marriage bed into a battlefield, and the tribes of Israel are born from the wreckage. 10 men throw their own flesh and blood into a dry cistern, and a passing caravan carries him toward a throne. A grieving father weeps over a bloody coat, and the cycle of trauma replicates perfectly. You cannot just look at the individual stories. You have to step back and look at the architecture of the book itself. 10 starving brothers bow down on a polished marble floor, and the sword of revenge is finally dropped. Same bloodline, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the goat skins. A son covering his hands in slaughtered animal hair to deceive a trembling father in the dark. And a generation later, 10 sons dipping a beautiful coat in goat's blood to deceive their father in the open daylight. The exact same poison, passed down the root system. The trauma echoing perfectly across the decades. And yet, the covenant did not break. The chosen family is not a model of pristine holy living. It is a canvas for an aggressive, relentless grace. If you are in a season where the friction in your own house feels incurable, if you are sitting at a dinner table rigged with invisible tripwires, navigating the heavy silence of withheld approval, or carrying the sharp, metallic sting of old betrayals, do not assume you have been disqualified from the presence of God. He does not require a flawless environment to go to work. If this reached something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels weighed down by the history of their own family tree. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. You have to look at the skeletal structure holding these 50 chapters together. Genesis is not a random collection of ancient campfire tales. And may the God who built his kingdom out of a broken, divided, and desperate family walk with you through the tensions of your own, and bring you out carrying a piece you could not have manufactured with your own hands. It is tied together by a single, deliberate Hebrew word, a word that echoes exactly 10 times. And the moment you understand how this word functions, you realize the author is handing you a map. The architecture of Genesis hinges on a single Hebrew noun, toldat. It translates to generations, or records, or the account of a family line. The word comes from the Hebrew root yalad, meaning to bear, to beget, to bring forth. It is the language of birth. It is the language of life pushing forward into the future. It appears exactly 10 times in the book. 10 structural pillars, 10 chapter markers holding up the scroll, the heavens and the earth. Adam, Noah, the sons of Noah, Shem, Terah, Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob. Every time you hit the word Toldot, the camera zooms in. The lens focuses on one specific branch of the family tree. The younger one is lying on the ground, his blood crying out from the soil. Only one brother walks back. And every single time, the tree is rotting from the inside out. In the ancient Near East, genealogies served one very specific purpose. They legitimized power. If you were a pharaoh in Egypt or a warlord in Babylon, your scribes wrote your history to prove your dynasty was pure. You scrubbed the scandals from the clay tablets. You erased the weak links and the betrayals. You carved your lineage into towering stone monuments to prove your bloodline was flawless, heroic, and ordained by the gods. Genesis does the exact opposite. Genesis is not a PR campaign. It is an autopsy. Look at the rhythm of the text. Adam's Toldot. One brother crushes another's skull in the dirt over a rejected sacrifice. Noah's Toldot. A father survives the end of the world, only to get blackout drunk in his tent. A son walks in and exploits his nakedness. A curse splinters the family forever. Terah's Toldot. A patriarch is told to leave his pagan homeland, but he stalls out halfway and dies in Haran. His son goes on, only to repeatedly hand his own wife over to foreign kings just to protect his own neck. Isaac's Toldot. Twin boys wrestle violently in the womb. They grow up to rip each other apart over a bowl of red stew, and the trembling hands of a blind father. Jacob's Toldot. 10 older brothers look at the favorite son in his multicolored coat. This is how the human story begins. Not with a theological treatise. Not with an invading foreign army crossing a border. They do not see flesh and blood. They see a piece of property they can sell to a passing caravan for 20 pieces of silver. Same word, same pattern. The author is forcing you to look at the chronic, incurable dysfunction of the chosen seed. Every time life is brought forth, every time Yaled happens, it immediately collides with human selfishness. You can almost feel the tension bleeding through the parchment, the bitter taste of stolen meals, the deafening silence between brothers who refuse to speak, the sting of betrayal inside the very tents, where God's presence was supposed to dwell. These are the records of the families God chose to rescue the world, and they cannot even rescue themselves. But to really understand the depth of this fracture, you cannot just look at the outline. You have to step inside one of these tents. You have to look at the household of the man called the Father of Faith, and you have to watch 2 desperate women go to war over a promise that was taking too long. The heat inside the goat hair tent is stifling. 10 years of waiting have hardened into a suffocating, unbearable silence. Sarai, the matriarch, looks at her empty hands. The promise of a great nation feels like a cruel, lingering joke. It begins with domestic violence. It begins with siblings who cannot share the same breathing room. And the pattern does not stop there. So she takes control. She takes her Egyptian servant, Hagar, and pushes the girl into her husband's arms. In the ancient Near East, this is not a scandal. It is a standard legal loophole. It is a socially acceptable way to secure an heir when biology fails. But the moment Hagar conceives, the fragile ecosystem of the camp shatters. The pregnant slave looks at the barren mistress. The Hebrew text is blunt. Hagar looks at Sarai with contempt. The social hierarchy flips in an instant. You can feel the sudden drop in temperature. The cold stares across the cooking fires. The whispered insults. The biting. Domestic cruelty that turns a shared living space into a war zone. Sarai retaliates with a vengeance. She makes the environment so toxic, so utterly unlivable, that a pregnant teenager decides the lethal wilderness is safer than the chosen family's camp. Hagar runs. She walks into a desert where the sand burns through leather sandals. There is no water, no shelter, just the blinding, inescapable sun and the certainty of death. She is entirely alone, an expendable piece of property, discarded by the people who were supposed to bring a blessing to the nations. This is not a story about ancient surrogacy laws. The violence just changes shape. A husband throws his wife into a pagan king's harem to save his own skin. It is a portrait of the collateral damage caused by our impatience. Abram and Sarai were promised a miracle, but they could not endure the waiting. They tried to manufacture the divine timeline with human hands, and it tore their household apart. The first major family conflict in the Abrahamic narrative is born directly out of a refusal to trust the process. But out there in the burning sand, something unprecedented happens. God finds Hagar by a spring of water. He does not send her back with a theological lecture. He gives her a promise. He gives her descendants. And Hagar, the abused, discarded Egyptian slave, becomes the first person in the entire biblical record to give God a name. El Roi, the God who sees me. God's presence is not confined to the dysfunctional tent of the chosen patriarch. He is out in the desert, sitting in the dirt with the victims of their dysfunction. The divided tent in Genesis 16 is a tragedy. But the fracture in this bloodline is about to go much deeper, because the most dangerous conflicts in Genesis do not actually start with hatred or jealousy. They start with a very specific, devastating kind of love. An Egyptian slave girl runs into a desolate wilderness because her mistress is making her life a living hell. Two sisters turn their shared. We assume that families are torn apart by hatred. We think the enemy of a peaceful household is hostility, or bitterness, or a sudden influx of malice that turns parents and siblings against one another. But in the book of Genesis, the most lethal force in the chosen bloodline is not hatred at all. Look at Genesis chapter 25, verse 28. The narrative is setting the stage for the next generation of the covenant, focusing on an aging Isaac, his wife Rebekah, and their twin boys. The text offers this devastatingly simple summary of their household dynamics. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The word your English Bible uses for love here is the Hebrew ahav. It is a word that appears all over the Old Testament, and its range of meaning is wider than you might expect. It can describe romantic desire, covenantal faithfulness, and even political alliances between ancient kings. But at its foundational root, ahav is not primarily an emotion or a warm feeling you carry in your chest. In the biblical context, ahav is an action of intense, exclusive preference. It is the deliberate act of choosing one thing at the direct expense of another. The very first time the word ahav appears in the Bible is just a few chapters earlier. In Genesis 22, marriage bed into a vicious, decade-long battlefield of fertility. A father plays favorites so openly that his sons strip their youngest. God tells Abraham to take his son, his only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him on the mountain. That love was singular. It was whole and undivided. But a generation later, Isaac takes that exact same word and splinters it. He looks at his twin boys and he divides his loyalty. If seeing the original language behind the English translations makes the text come alive for you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the parents draw their battle lines inside the family tent. They do not just feel affection for their favorite children, they are actively withdrawing their loyalty from the other. When you read ahav as this kind of exclusionary preference, the verse changes from a passive statement of fact into a domestic declaration of war. This ahav is not the glue holding the family together. It is the wedge driving them apart. This is the profound tragedy of the patriarchal families. They do not fail because they stop caring. They fail because their care is weaponized. Isaac gives his ahav to the rugged, outdoor hunter who brings him wild game. Rebekah gives her ahav to the quiet, calculating son who stays among the tents. The love is poured out entirely on one child, brother, and throw him into a dry cistern to die. A mother manipulates her blind, dying husband just to steal a blessing, while the other is left to starve for approval. And when parental approval becomes a scarce resource in a household, siblings do not just drift apart organically. They begin to actively hunt each other. Because a love this deeply fractured is bound to demand a casualty, And that casualty finally arrives on the day a blind father asks for a simple bowl of stew. An old man lies on a bed in the dark. His eyes are clouded with cataracts. His body is failing. The smell of roasted meat and warm bread floats through the heavy fabric of the tent. Isaac is ready to give away the covenant. He calls for the son he loves. He waits for the scent of the open field. But the man walking into the room is not the hunter. It is the quiet brother, draped in his siblings' finest clothes. With the skins of slaughtered goats tied to his hands and his neck, Jacob stands before his blind father. He lies about his name. He lies about how he found the game so quickly, weaponizing the name of God himself to sell the deception. Because the Lord your God brought it to me. He whispers, the betrayal is absolute. He steps close enough for the old man to reach out and touch him.